Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Mastering Dungeons, your favorite tabletop RPG podcast. I'm Shawn Merwin, and I would like to welcome back Teos's computer and Teos.
I mean, it has been, Shawn, the biggest adventure. It is a strange fate that we should suffer so much fear and doubt over so small a thing. It is kind of incredible that I went through 2 hard drives, 2 sticks of RAM, and reinstalling my entire computer twice. And now I think, knock on wood, I think that we're normal. Go with that.
Normal is a relative term, obviously. So hopefully we are back to our normal, which is far from the rest of the world's normal.
Yeah.
But it's good to see you again. Thankfully, Ben Burns stepped in last week, and Dante, with the recording expertise, stepped in to help us out. So we appreciate that. Tip of the hat to those 2 fine gentlemen.
And can I say, speaking of those folks and the rest of the team, I got my copy of Ethereal Expanse in. Beautiful. Really cool.
Excellent. Yes, very happy to see that out in the world. That's something I was working on like 2 years ago. So, it's like, oh yeah, it's a book and it's out. That's great. And obviously, Joe Rosso and James Hake heavily involved in that as well. So very happy to see that out in the world. And also happy to see in the world our listeners.
Yes.
Who continue for some reason to listen to us, back us on Patreon, and sometimes even send us questions. So we have 2 more questions to get to this week. The first from Tejas Kudva, 2543 via YouTube, who asked this. Do you think the existence of the internet and fan culture has accelerated how quickly we expect to adopt a new version of a TTRPG? Shawn's comments about being confused with weapon masteries suddenly sent me back to my friends and I transitioning from 2nd edition to 3rd and not really understanding feats as an addition to class abilities and the implications of how they would go together as your level advanced. Yes. However, I also don't really remember being fussed about it, and we all kind of accepted it as growing pains. There also didn't exist the kind of immediate analysis that you can find now on the internet. I mean, we are definitely in an era where everything, not just tabletop role-playing games, have been changed, not just by the technology that's available, but how that technology changes our lives and how we expect that implementation of that technology to go from mainstream things to our hobbies or our peripheral interests. And so the other day I had to change my headlight in my car. And I remembered changing one, 30 years ago. And what I had to do was ask my father-in-law, who was heavily into cars, how do I do this? And he showed me.
Right.
But without his knowledge, there was no internet to check. There was no, let's go to YouTube and there's 27 videos for every make and model of a car about exactly how to do it. And so, I had to go to the dealership or to the parts store and say, I am driving a 1994 Ford Taurus wagon. And they had to pull out this huge book. And flip through it to find the right make and model for that part. And now it's like I go to YouTube, 30 seconds later, I'm told exactly what part I need and how to replace it for my exact make and model of car, and it's done. And that's what the internet has done for us, for better or worse.
I remember many years ago, I had a new mower, and I had to look something up. And I was standing in the yard, and on my phone, I pulled down the manual for it. And I felt like I was in the Matrix, right? Like, like I need to know Kung Fu. Like, I'll just download this. And it's amazing. But I will say, having just spent 2 weeks of troubleshooting a computer, there is also a lot of wrong information out there, right? And this gets to the clever parts. There are a lot of clever parts in this question, and acknowledging that in the question, it acknowledges, the internet isn't always right. And there's definitely that angle to it where you can find a lot of forum threads of someone saying a thing that isn't right as a possible solution to your problem. And so it can be there. I did eventually take my computer to a person who does this all day long to, have them go through that, because it can be like that. And sticking closer to RPGs, this week and 2 weeks ago, something like that, I ran Deadlands. And Deadlands is interesting in that it was originally the RPG, and then it gave birth to Savage Worlds, the kind of RPG system that can play many types of games. And then it became the core that you use for Deadlands. So I kickstarted the newest version of Deadlands, not realizing I needed to buy the Savage Worlds core book. So I have 2 books, right? And I'm trying to read the rules in Deadlands, but it assumes you know the core rules. So then I have to read the core rules, but the core rules are written for kind of a slightly different audience. So then I went to the internet and found the Quick Start Guide, which actually tells you all the rules in one place. And I'm thinking, why didn't they do that in the Deadlands book, right? And it was this kind of confusion of what is it really wanting me to do? And we saw that multiple times in both sessions, especially this last one, where it's like, should we look at the Quick Start Guide or the core book or the other book? And the book doesn't do a good job of telling you, hey, this is a core rule versus somewhere in the Deadlands book, right?
Yeah. And that's what's interesting about tabletop role-playing games and the advancement of technology and the advancement of society, in that in the 80s, to learn to play D&D, you would sit down with the book, or you would go to someone who had read the book, supposedly, and knew how to play, or some combination of those two. There weren't actual plays. There weren't online tutorials. So you just did one of these two things. But when a rule system is as complex as AD&D, let's say, was, which wasn't necessarily complex, but it was complex, but it wasn't extensive, I guess, is what I'm looking for. Or it didn't have to be extensive. But people could read the same rules and come up with totally different ways to play, thinking that they were playing the way that the rules said.
Yes.
So they could say, well, I'm playing the rules as written. And someone else could say, no, I'm playing the rules as written. And they were both right, but they were also both wrong.
Yeah.
But you enjoyed it anyway.
Right. Yes.
Whereas
everybody
now,
had a blast, right? Everybody had a blast, but you would suddenly play at someone else's table and go, wait, what did you guys do? Oh, well, the blah, blah, blah rule. And you're like, is that how it works? And they're like, that's how we do it. And you're like, how do you do it? And you'd have a discussion, and then someone would adopt the other person's system. And that's the way you did it from then on out.
Right. And so now companies, from game design companies that do videos to video companies that do games, assume that people are learning in different ways, right? And so in your case, for the Deadlands thing, they may assume that every one of their players is going to go to a video to learn. Even if that company doesn't make the video, they may, somebody will do an actual play, or somebody will do something, and people will see it.
Yeah.
And so as expectations change, the way things are delivered changes, and then the way things are designed change based on that. But I was going to go on a wild tangent, but I'm going to stop.
I'm going to say, coming back to this thing, like whether it's Weapon Masteries or Deadlands, the text should make sense. And it fails when it doesn't, right? So yes, we may have accelerated our view, or we may have changed our view of how quickly we should be able to adopt a new version of a TTRPG, but this does not take us away from the necessity of good writing. And Weapon Masteries should not require endless YouTube videos to figure out definitively, right? Yeah. Because it was a choice to write it to be that complicated and to change the wording in those ways to, when you have Jeremy Crawford saying, as we covered show before last, that Weapon Masteries, I guess, are intended to allow you this sort of shuffling of what item you're holding. That's a choice. And it didn't have to be that way. And I would say that I don't know that that's what was needed for this to be fun when it creates so much confusion, right? And so you could weigh that differently. And similarly, the desire to say, well, Savage Worlds is our core rules. That's great. But if I can't read your book and figure out how to play the game, you've failed, right? At some level. And it's not like it was the end of the world, right? We had a blast. It was a very fun session of Deadlands. But that if their expectation was, oh, you will figure it out somehow on the internet, back to the drawing board, fellas.
Yeah. So I don't know if we can answer the question about how we're expected to adapt or adopt new versions, because, as Teos said, it always comes down to how clear is the writing.
Yeah.
And for the more complex system you make, the harder it is to be perfectly clear in the writing. And even if you are perfectly clear, it will be interpreted in different ways, either because of poor reading comprehension or because people want to read it wrong to play the game in the way that they want to play it.
Yeah.
For better or worse.
Good way of saying that. Yeah.
Yeah. It is an ever evolving issue in game design or any kind of design to take the medium and use it as best you can.
And, like a Blades in the Dark comes up often. The people say, like, I was so excited for it. I really love these systems in it, but I didn't quite grasp it, right? And there's an update to it that's being published or has been released, I think, digitally. That has been a reputation of the game, that it is hard to figure out exactly what it's telling you to do. And, well, that deserves a second edition, I would say, right? To clarify those things, because ultimately the game will be adopted faster if the rules are clear.
Yep. And it will be adopted faster if it uses a rule set that has already been tried, tested, and adopted by others. That's why you see so many people making 5e versions of things and then having people say, why are you making a 5e version of this? This other rule set would be so much better. Because people know 5e. Yeah. People understand the game loop. People understand the game flow. I'm talking with someone who their group had only played 5e up to this point, and now they're playing Call of Cthulhu. And as always happens, they're trying to play Call of Cthulhu like it's 5e when it's a completely different game that has to be approached in a completely different way if it is going to flow the way that the game has been designed to flow. And so that's another thing. All right. They have the recency bias of what have I done most recently? Well, must be how everything works.
Yeah.
So lots to talk about there. Thank you for that question. And now we'll go to Matthew Snow via YouTube. I've just started running a Tales of the Valiant game for a group of friends as a first-time GM. During the first session, 2 of my players asked to include their teenage children. Then later, one of those younger players' friends was also brought into the group. We've had a few sessions now, and it's clear that some of the expectations for attention, collaborative storytelling with the older players, and a tendency to disrupt instead of engage are causing some issues. We've even discussed having the younger players at a separate table and only involving them when there is activity for the whole party so they can socialize mid-session, but I'd prefer not to have them feel singled out. Do you have any advice for how to engage younger players who may be going through that difficult phase in life and how to maintain a fun and lighthearted atmosphere while still trying to address this? So I'm going to let Teos answer, but I want to address this question of age at the table, because whenever we discuss age at the gaming table, we always get a couple people saying, well, my 8-year-old is the best player in the world and can concentrate on everything and does all the great stuff and has a PhD in psychology. Great. And then we have well, my table are all middle-aged guys, and they're more juvenile than any tweens that you could ever hope to encounter. All well and good. All of those things, we give you your individual differences. But I think Teos and I can both agree that in our experiences, which are quite extensive with playing with different folks, strangers, all age groups, that this is a common problem.
Yeah.
All right, take it away, Teos.
Yeah, for sure. Specifically to kids, this is sort of a thing that very few kids, even when they are very mature and very intelligent and so on, very few kids will play like adults. And so what you're describing is absolutely normal, right? This is kind of how it goes. But it's not just about kids. It's anytime you have two groups that play differently, right? If you have a group that's totally into acting and things like that, and another group that's super tactical and just about slaying monsters, and you try to combine them, that's the rough part, right? And so if you have two different types of players at your table, you have to either compromise, which means that everybody's giving up something that they want, right? Like knowing that in the middle of something where you really want a thing to go a certain way, the kids may want to burn the tavern because that sounds super fun because we can't do that in real life. And you either have to be okay with that and compromise, and then later the kids will have to deal with the fact that now the adults want to do this whole intrigue layer involving the king and the court, and they are super bored by this, and they will have to just deal with that. So you either have to both compromise like that, or you have to separate out, right, in some way. I agree with what's being asked here or being suggested by Matthew, where he says, I don't really want to kind of like have the kids over on the side and then kind of pull them in for the whole party piece. And I think that's true. What you could do is really speak to the fact that, hey, we often want different things from the game. What if we have, the first hour is like an intrigue or whatever it is, the aspect that the adults really want. You have that kind of happen, and then you all go out adventuring together to do that kind of fun thing. And you could maybe do that, right? Have almost like a two-part session where one is this aspect of the game that is undesirable to the younger crowd, and then you go out and, kick doors down and take away beat up monsters. Or you have to create two games, right? If you're not compromising or you're not splitting up, then, you have to be in completely separate areas. And that's what I have often done, right? When I run kid games, they are kid games, and I'm running at their speed, what they want, the way they want, because that is ultimately more fun for them, and actually for me too, because I'm not trying to struggle and do things in doing that way. And when I have invited like a teenager to join one of my games, they often play it really quiet because they're the only one, right? But it's when you're mixing things in, that's where it goes sideways.
Yeah, I can't really add much to what Teos said there. There are tools, there are procedures that you can use to meld different play styles, but there's always going to have to be that understanding of compromise and the understanding that there is behavior that is okay, there's behavior that is not okay. And just to very briefly touch on one of the tools, it's sort of the opposite of what Teos said. And it's not that I don't agree with what Teos said, but when Teos said, spend an hour doing this and an hour doing that, one of the things that can help two different groups with different styles meld together is switching back and forth more quickly rather than for an extended period of time. Because if you're going back and forth more quickly, there's less chance that one of those groups will be frustrated by the play of the other. Yeah. Now, this means changing your game.
Yeah.
Essentially. So what it means is, the first thing I would do is put if you have a 6 and there's 3 and 3, two totally different play styles, put the 3 on one side of the table, 3 on the other. First of all, if physically you could do that. And then you go back and forth between the two groups quickly by saying, all right, you said you want to burn down the tavern. Get together between the three of you. I'm going to give you 5 minutes. Tell me exactly how you do that. Now over here, you want to know what the rift between the king and the court is. All right, this is what you learned, blah, 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 blah. All right, so now just make this check. Okay, you're back over here. Tell me what your plan is. Yep. Okay, I'm going to tell you why that plan isn't going to work, because you know that the guards come by every 5 minutes, and your plan is going to take longer than that. So if you want to burn the tavern down, you have to come up with a different plan that takes less than 5 minutes. Okay, you over here. And that way you're letting these two groups, and as long as they're not shouting over each other, that 5-minute span is generally enough
Yeah.
time for them to get their fix in. And then you can all come together and say, all right, the guards overheard your plan to burn down the thing. They noticed you were being suspicious. So now we have a combat. Here we go.
Yeah.
So
It's
you do
tough.
have
I
to
mean,
make
yeah.
changes. Yeah.
And that's ultimately, as DM, right? It's got to work for you. And so whichever
Mhm.
way you go with this, it needs
Right.
to be fun. If you're doing like what Shawn described, or if you're doing, maybe you're running 2 sessions a week, that might be too much. So, think through what is going to work for you, because ultimately it's got to be fun for you. It's all going to fall apart.
Yep. And we've got some great questions queued up for next week already. You can always send us your questions via all of the methods, and you can even email them like one person did for next week's episode at masteringdnd@gmail.com. Well, we've got some news to talk about, so let's get right into that, starting with Bloomberg talking about Hasbro shifting emphasis. What does Bloomberg have to say about Hasbro, Teos?
Well, the headlines being shared around is no more film projects. And what this really means when they talk to CEO Chris Cox is he said that they're no longer going to lead or co-finance film projects. Licensing is still fine. They'll continue to do that. But this whole idea of the D&D movie and how it was made, they do not want to try that anymore, which is interesting and arguable. But I think what it also translates to is, the D&D movie was something that was adjacent, hoped to be a new revenue stream, right? And this was part of the whole E1, bring in a different type of business that sits in along with the other business. What Chris Cox and Hasbro are trying to do is pivot, right? From toys to video games. And so a lot of the discussion is around their emphasis on video games and what they're trying to do. And Bloomberg, thankfully, in this article does say, hey, back in 2023, which was, let me check the clock calendar, it's a year ago. They shuttered 5, Hasbro shuttered 5 video games in 2023. And one of the industry analysts is quoted as saying, video games are very, 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 I cannot emphasize this enough, competitive, right? But the analyst goes on to say, well, if you can marry it to a strong brand, as we've seen with Monopoly Go or Baldur's Gate, this can actually work. So, who knows, right? But it is risky. There's nothing for sure. Hasbro's working on a sci-fi video game Exodus, a previously unannounced D&D video game, and an action-adventure G.I. Joe game. And they hope to release 1 to 2 games per year by 2026.
Yeah. They're buying lottery tickets.
Yes.
That's all they're doing.
Investment lottery tickets need not actually pay off.
Right. They're buying lottery tickets based on the last thing that worked.
Yeah.
And they're trying to make sure their investors realize that they are going to do whatever it takes to win those investors the most money.
Yeah.
The last thing that worked for them was Monopoly Go and Baldur's Gate 3. So that's what they're going to do now. If the D&D movie, Honor Among Thieves, had been a huge $1 billion movie, they would be dropping all video games and they would be opening up their very own movie studio.
Right.
Which would then fail because movies are very, 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 I cannot emphasize this enough, competitive.
Yeah. I mean, and I loved it because they've got Arena, which kind of, by all accounts that I've ever looked at, is a very successful way to have digital cards. Well, they're not happy enough with it, apparently. They're testing a video game version of Commander that is trying to draw more revenue by a higher collectability, similar to Marvel Snap. So it's just this, unfortunately, right, the way corporations are, you can't ever say, oh, wow, what a success, we're done here. You have to continue on and on and on.
Yep, you have to invest all that money that you just earned into the next thing that's probably going to fail.
The good news is investors are super loyal, right? I'm not trying to segue into our next story at all.
Oh, Tell us about our next story, Teos. Tell us about Hasbro being sued by their investors.
Yes, well, Hasbro is being sued for lying to investors regarding their inventory levels. And this lawsuit was filed, I think it's now 2 weeks ago, alleging that Hasbro misrepresented its inventory in violation of the federal security laws, hurting investors. And there is a West Palm Beach firefighters pension fund and a law firm behind this filing a complaint in New York, asking the court to grant it class action status so that other investors and stock purchasers can participate. When what they're saying is that during the pandemic, Hasbro saw growth, as did everybody making various kinds of games, so they overreached, accumulating too much inventory ahead of the 2022 holiday season. When that inventory then failed to move, Hasbro misled investors into thinking that the demand remained strong and the inventory was not a problem. So then in 2023, Hasbro reported that revenue was down due to the poor toy market sales and that they had to lay off 15% of its staff, but continued to say it didn't have a demand problem and that it was working through inventory and all this. And then in October 2023, Hasbro said it spent $50 million to move and market inventory as an obsolescence cost. So this is outdated and devalued inventory sold at very low prices, so at a big loss prices. So the lawsuit claims that this led to the stock falling and investors losing $831 million in shareholder value. There's another law firm that's out there seeking shareholders to want to join a possible class action suit. We've included links to both of these in the show notes, but it just shows that perilous, that fine line, right?
Yep. Please, investors, give us money. Oh, wait, you're going to sue us because our stock tanked.
Yeah. And I mean, and companies do play inventory games. I obviously have no idea as to whether Hasbro did or did not play bad inventory games, but all companies play inventory games, and every company out there is having investor calls trying to make it all seem super rosy so that you'll invest in them no matter what.
Well, going from the bad to the worse. As the election results in the US became clear, there was a corresponding flee from Twitter, or what's remaining of Twitter, to the point where there are no hard numbers to this, but it is very clear that that Twitter now has a fraction of what they used to have in their user base. And two competitors, Bluesky and Threads, have seen a vast increase in their user base. Again, it's impossible to nail down exact numbers for a variety of reasons, but I know that I lost 1,000 followers on Twitter after the election and gained that many on Bluesky. So that's 20% loss of my followers with a 300% increase, 400% increase in my followers on Bluesky. So that should be a good indication of people being fed up with the status of what's happening on what is now X.
I'm happy as can be over on Mastodon. It is. I mean, I'm on Bluesky as well, and I don't spend any time on Twitter at all. It's such a terrible place. But at the end of the day, I do remain concerned about Bluesky. Someday, and I think we see this now. It's been well documented what the encrapification process is. Someday, Bluesky must yield money to its investors, and it must do something. And so, I'm all for people moving there, but so long as platforms are of that nature, be prepared to move again. Unless you go to a place like Mastodon that is literally built to not go through these problems. Someday you've got to pay the bills, right? And we've seen this with places like Substack. You can't be on Substack, or you should not be on Substack without understanding that someday they will need their money, and they will come for it, and you will suffer because that's how it works. Because you're not paying for it, and someday they will want their due.
Yep. And in somewhat related news, the owner of X posted publicly that Wizards of the Coast should, quote, burn in hell for some of the things written about Gary Gygax in the introduction to the I forgot the name of the book.
The 50 it's the making of original Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, the making of original Dungeons and Dragons, where it called out the sexism and problematic nature of some of the rules and some of the writings of Gary Gygax. And that's led to a little bit of a backlash as well. And a big discussion about, what the movement through time of social interaction causes, what it means, and how it should affect the legacy of people who were alive and creating during that time.
Yeah.
And this has never not been an issue. It will always continue to be an issue. And it helps to have an honest and frank discussion of what this sort of change over time means to society. But one thing you don't do is tell people that they should burn in hell, especially when you control A, social media, B, potentially government position. It's a very suspicious use of your power.
Yeah.
And I think probably I will end there, and probably Teos doesn't want to go any deeper into it than that.
No, I mean, I don't want to give more attention to those particular individuals that cause trouble, but to me, the emphasis should always be on there's clear ways that we should be and should act, and that companies should act. And when you see good stuff, head towards it. When you see bad stuff, avoid it. Right? It's that simple. I'll cleanse our palate on entities with saying that I got this in the mail. So I'm holding up a United States Post Office flyer, little insert thing, whatever that came, a little booklet called Stamps and Stamp-Inspired Products, and it features right on the front Dungeons and Dragons, and almost every single page in this thing has like a D&D stamp-related product, right? Whether it's field notes with D&D figures, or it's sheets of stamps, or bookmarks, or T-shirts, framed prints, right? Like just all kinds of cool stuff in here, and dice and stuff like that. And so I was tickled pink to get this in my mail and go like, oh, cool, it's on the cover. Oh, wait, it's like in pretty much every time I flip a page, I'm seeing something awesome from the post office. And so this is your D&D baloney right here. And there you go. That's good stuff.
We love the D&D baloney. And we love conventions. And very, very soon, if not by the time this show drops, the room block will be open for Winter Fantasy, which is, as it usually is, in Fort Wayne, Indiana, February 5th through 9th, 2025. Teos is holding up his Winter Fantasy glass, and I should be attending. It is a great, smaller, but great show, and I'm looking forward to all of the cool stuff that's going to be happening there. I know some of it, but I can't talk about it yet. But keep an eye out for that at baldmangames.com or other places where Baldman Games gives updates. And as I was flipping through convention stuff, I also noticed that Goodman Games has announced its very first convention, also taking place in Fort Wayne, Indiana, on the 3rd of May, 2025. It's a one-day convention where they're going to, quote unquote, open their warehouse and also have some of their most prolific and well-known designers like Harley Stroh running games for folks. So I thought that was pretty cool. Goodman Games has been a long time force in the gaming industry, both for their own games as well as their 5e compatible content. So there is a link in our show notes to the blog that has announced that. It is called Dungeon Con 1.
Cool. Yeah, neat to hear.
Yeah. So tell me about Roll20's Bastion contest.
Yeah, I'll do that real quickly. It's there's a link in our show notes, and you can go to pages.roll20.net/build a bastion. So they are having a contest using their Dungeon Scrawl utility, which allows you to draw out dungeons in other areas. And the contest just says win a Roll20 prize package. It's unclear what that really means, but I'm sure it's good. And if you create the ultimate bastion, they could give you this. Somewhere there probably is more detail on exactly how many winners and so on, but it seemed like a fun idea. If you're already planning on building a bastion, you could use Dungeon Scrawl to draw out the map of it and submit that to win. Kind of neat.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of our favorite bloggers, DM David, has put up a blog on his 25-year-old D&D wish list. So this awesome blog from David Hartledge talks about this wish list that he put together back in 1999. So everyone who was playing D&D was probably playing second edition, maybe even playing basic or that line of products. But third edition was getting ready to start. So David put up this wish list of what he wanted to see for a third edition of the game. What are some of the things that he talked about, Teos?
Yeah, he goes through some really neat things. I mean, there's some system-dependent things like dropping Thaco, right, to hit armor class 0. But at a larger level, things like having these... He wanted unified mechanics, right? So there would be things in second edition where one time you're rolling percentile dice to do something, and then another time you need to roll high, another time you need to roll low, right? So just to unify things together. Or to simplify how XP is gained, because different groups did it so very differently. And so he talks through not just what he was thinking of back in 1999, going from 2E to 3E, but what 4E and 5E have done for all these things. And one of the most interesting ones I found was where he talks about the desire back in 1999 that D&D publish fewer books, right? This inundating glut kind of thing. If you think about all the settings that were back in 2E, right? All the famous settings with all of their huge lines. I mean, Ravenloft has, 40 products or something like that for it. And so David notes that 3E and 4E kind of failed to do this goal of publishing fewer books overall, and that 5E initially was really good at publishing fewer books and has then sped up in the later years. And, could they maybe publish fewer books, which I thought was cool.
Yeah. And so as you're sitting here now, maybe you started playing with 5th edition. I want to hear what your wish list is for 6th edition, right? Based on David's list from 25 years ago, right? What would you want to change in the game? And I'm sure everyone's wish list will be a little different, but that publish fewer books was something that caught my eye too. I thought that was hilarious because as much as we want more, especially back in 1999 when there was just felt like there was a book coming out every week. I could definitely understand that that wish.
Yep. And I'll just say before you had one quick thing, which I love doing this test, and I invite others to join me in this. Walk into your local gaming store and take a look at the shelves and imagine you're a brand new player. You've heard about the game and you want to enter into D&D, and you're looking at this shelf. Does it make sense? Right? And so can you pick out what you should start with? Can you pick out which books are core? Can you pick out, how these products relate and when they might have been released? And it's very easy as an edition gets longer that it's just a mess, and the shelf is a mess, and you don't know where to start or what to pick up. And in fact, even if you're the expert and a new person comes up and asks you, where should I start? You might be like, well, there are 3 starter sets, but another one's coming out soon. And there's also these other starter sets that are themed. Do you like Rick and Morty? Hours could go by with no clear answer, right?
For sure. And now for our creator corner, we're going to start with a Cupcake Dragon card game and kids book. Outland Entertainment and friend of the show, Alana Abbott, are kickstarting this. The game was created by DW and Drew Vogel, based on artwork by Aaron Palmsmeyer, which is a loot-taking card game for all ages. You play cards, collect loot, and feed cupcakes to dragons. You can play with from 2 to 6 players in about 30 minutes. But in addition to the card game comes a kid's storybook written by Alana and Jeremy Moeller, illustrated by Aaron Palmsmeyer, and inspired by the game. All of the design for the game and the book are done. They're just trying to raise funds now via Kickstarter to print them. So if you are interested in a nice, quick, kid fun card game and then a storybook to go with it, you can check that out on Kickstarter. Again, it's Outland Entertainment, and it's the Cupcake Dragon card game and children's book. Link in our show notes.
Awesome.
And what does our friend MT Black have coming?
So he has his world Iskandar, and he has been putting out a free explorer's journal for that setting. Each volume contains setting material, adventure seeds, magic items, and other 5e material. And volume 4 is available now. It has details on a whole bunch, and just a tiny bit of it is details on the Isle of Sorcery, new player options, treasures, magic items, and encounters to face on the Salt Road, and a lot more. So you have to, click to see it, but it's free on DriveThruRPG. Link in our show notes. Look for the Iskandar Explorers, Iskandar, Iskandar, Explorer's Journal.
Awesome. And that is our news and questions and commentary for the week.